Hi Sulaiman,
Hi,
welcome to Sudeep Audio's channel.
thank you.
We've known each other for the last 16 years.
Has it been that long?
Yes,
Well, I'm not that old
not am
actually.
I. At least I don't pretend to be. But the thing is, I'm thankful to you for checking out Svarshala when I came first to your studio at
Yes, that's
Utsav
right.
and the first version, and you showed me little tips and tricks and to improve the product. And thank you so much for that.
Yeah.
So,
It's a great product. I really liked the sounds at that point. Obviously, we've now outgrown those sounds, but every once in a while, that the sounds come out and we start using it, and it's really cool. I haven't checked out the new update though. I believe it's supposed to be very nice, very nice.
and of course, we also have Bollywood grooves and elements that we've been part of.
That was such a lovely project. Bollywood Grooves was it was designed to actually create awareness of the Indian rhythms in the international market, and the kind of grooves that Bollywood has heard, but the international market hasn't heard that kind of sound. The big sound of Bollywood, the big the big drums, the big dholak tabla ensembles, and all of that, the duffs. Everybody's heard the single duff and small things, but they haven't heard a big ensemble sound. So I think it was a really successful set of sounds that we created.
That's true. And coming back to sound and your journey in sound, we know about, I mean, Salim's already spoken about it and you've spoken about it in several videos and interviews. But how did you choose rhythm as your instrument? I mean, or your kind of liking in
Uh,
music?
my dad used to have an orchestra.
Right.
It was a community orchestra, and he used to be the band leader as well as the tutor for a lot of the boys who used to come and learn. And my dad used to play, he used to play about 14, 15 different instruments. Right? He could pick up an instrument and start playing. He played the saxophone, he played the clarinet. He, of course, played the accordion, which was a very different thing to play in terms of the touch and the feel and all of that. And he could sit down on the drums and play. So my fascination started from there, from that band, because when I used to sit and watch everybody playing together or rehearsing together, the only thing that really attracted me was this drum kit which my dad had made. And it had so many different things. I was still a child. I was like maybe 4, 5 years old. And it really fascinated me. The keyboard I had at home because my dad always used to get up and play. But the drum was something, it had the bass drum and these toms and cymbals and hi-hats and pedals that you could play on. And as a curious child, the first thing that attracts you is always what sounds the loudest, first of all. And I guess rhythmically, I was DNA'd to have that rhythmic quality, because even as a child, I used to get my first instrument was a bongo.
Okay.
And so I guess it started very early on in the age. I did go and learn piano as well.
You did?
Yes, I did. I learned piano. But by the time I got into piano, my fingers had gotten slightly used to the drums, so a lot more stiffer. I used to practice about 5-6 hours a day, so drumstick hands are very stiff and very rough. So but I still did go and learn. I learned a lot of theory. I learned how to play piano. I learned Hindustani music as well. So I used to sit with a harmonium. I used to sing as well till my voice changed. I still do sometimes on stage.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
I
But
think we've heard your vocals in Aja Nachle. Are those your vocals?
which one?
In the.
Tatach Din. No, that I think is something we picked up as a sample from somewhere.
Okay.
It could have been also. I don't know. That has been some time now.
Right. So you picked up.
Yeah, so drums was my instrument of choice. I learnt tabla as well from Ustad Tawfiq Qureshi. And every once in a while, Zakir Bhai used to come and give me a lesson, or he would come and say, "Acha kar rahe ho." And every Sunday, I used to go to their house and sit and learn tabla. So yeah, I've learned tabla, I've learned drums, and then obviously everything changed once the electronic era began, where uh, rock shows weren't paying anymore, and studio sessions were really the in thing. Drum machines had beautiful sounds. The RX5 had the hey, the wow, and the ooh, and all these different things. So one naturally got attracted towards the drum machines and the electronic way of producing music.
But all self-taught? I mean, you kind of opened user manuals and fiddled around with those machines?
Yes, I did. Yeah, yeah. I was one of those guys who actually sat and messed around and read every single book there was to read, and yeah, I discovered pretty much every single instrument and drum machine on my own without anybody telling me how to play it, because that would be their way of analyzing a drum machine. So yeah, I did.
Right.
I learned pretty much on my own, and it came to a point where a lot of people used to come to me sometimes and ask me, "Arey, how do you do this? What did you do? How did you get this? How did you get this done?" Because drum machines like R8 and R8 Mark II, even the 626 or 808, none of those instruments had bend, right? Drum machine, generally you wouldn't need a bend. But in in the way our environment is, our baya needs a bend.
Yeah.
You need a dum. And I remember there was this drum machine card for R8, a sound bank called Indian Instruments or something. Ethnic it was called.
Okay.
And that instrument, it had the baya, but the baya was only a dum. It didn't have a dhum. So if you had to create a dhum, you had to do a dhum and a dhup. So you had to make two different sounds to make the dhum and the dhup. And one would control the other and bring the... So you had to actually mess around a little bit more than what you would have to. Whereas the RX5 had no Indian sounds, but it had bend. So I used to MIDI both of them together, and I would get a little bit of the baya from here and the chati from here, and mix and match all my sounds. And it was fun times at that point, because you were discovering new stuff and new ideas and new sounds, and it was good fun times.
Good. So, what was your first recording like? I mean, a commercial recording where you kind of, played something, and what did you play? If you can remember.
I think my first commercial recording was a commercial.
Okay.
If I remember correctly, it was for Sharangdev.
Okay.
And
so, were you playing alone or with Salim?
No, Salim wasn't there. Okay. I was supposed to do some drum parts for something that had already been done.
Okay.
And I was supposed to go in, and the drum track wasn't sounding so good. So Sharang had called me and said, just come and rework on the drum parts. I think that was like my initial first, very, very first few recordings that I had done.
Right. And did you perform on stage with your dad, or did you kind of...
I did perform on stage with my dad, yes. I played drums.
Right.
There was a point when I actually played keyboards as well.
Oh, okay.
So, but for most of the parts, I used to play drums.
Right.
I played with my dad for about a good 4-5 years.
So, did this stage fear kind of was there stage fear when you kind of went on, as a young boy? And
this is so funny. Stage fright went away very early for us, because I remember I was about 14, 15 years old, and my dad, because he was running this community band, there was some kind of internal dispute between the band.
okay.
And the drummer decided to not show up. The keyboard player decided to not show up. And I think the guitar player also decided not to show up. So my dad said, listen, by then I was playing drums. I was pretty okay on the drums. Not very hardcore, but I was okay. And I could play the keyboards as well. If you put a chord chart in front of me, I could play it. So he said, listen, I need you as a backup. In case there's a problem, I want you to be on stage. And at that time, I used to learn on the keyboard, I used to play and discover melodies. So at that point, I remember Axel F was very big. And so I used to play Axel F. And I remember it was some kind of a function where we had gone to. It was either a corporate concert or one of those things. And they had some people from outside India, and they came and said, play some English music, play some English music. We don't want to hear all this Lata Mangeshkar and R.D. Burman and those kind of songs. We want something modern. My dad had absolutely no knowledge about all the new current stuff in the Western world. So he took a 10-minute, 15-minute break, and he said, do you know any of the English songs? Can you play them on the keyboard? So I said, sure, I can try. So he said, okay, grab a pair of headphones and rehearse your stuff if you want. So I only knew Axel F, and the beginning, there were only two parts to it. It was a tam 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 tam, and then there was a tam 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 tam. And so I knew those two parts, and that was the whole song. So I sat with the drummer and I explained to him that this is the groove. I sat with the bass guy and I said, this is the bass. And then my dad said, Charu, you just play and we'll follow. And I started playing Axel F, and I think I played Axel F for about half an hour. Wow. Because the minute I started playing that, people started dancing. Okay. And the minute they came on the dance floor, then we didn't want to stop. So we kept playing, and then suddenly that whole thing converted into like a garba, into some, various different forms, into a 6/8 and a 4/4, and then into a club thing. And we did the whole thing. But so when I started playing initially, my hands were shaking, right? Because that was the first time I was actually playing on stage. I was 15 years old, probably younger slightly. After 5 minutes, it was all gone. That stage fright was completely gone because I saw people enjoying it. I did a couple of bum notes as well. Nobody noticed because it was all fine. They saw a young kid standing and playing. It was all good. And so that's when the stage fright just completely disappeared, and you started realizing the power that you had within you as a person to be able to give happiness with your talent. Right? You have talent, you can entertain people, and your entertainment gives them happiness. And so as you start imparting that happiness, they give happiness back to you, and it's the most wonderful thing in the world to be able to get that kind of happiness and that love from people.
Because of something that you are doing.
Because of something you're doing, and it's immediate, because you can see people dancing and you can see people enjoying, and they say, yeah, they're enjoying themselves. So that little bug didn't leave us. I think Salim was also there at that concert. And Salim was singing at that point, if I remember correctly. And we did the whole concert and we pulled off the whole thing, and my dad was like super happy. And 20 years later, we were on stage performing for the rest of the world, doing massive concerts.
Right. So, how did your studio journey begin? I mean, this was your stage kind of beginning?
Yeah, so studio started simultaneously, I think. When I was about 19, 20, my dad got us a keyboard. And
what keyboard was that, if you remember?
I think it started with a D20.
Okay.
The D20 was the first one that had a sequencer. Mm-hmm. The D10 had no sequencer. The Roland D10 had no sequencer. And the D20 came with an 8-track sequencer, but the memory on that was very less. Sequencer memory was very less. So my dad said, why don't you test the sequencer and see what it can do? So we started producing on it. And he said, at that point, We Are the World was like hot. It was a big song. So he said, let's produce We Are the World. Now, it's not an easy song to produce. It's very complicated, has multiple parts.
Yeah.
So, and we had modules, and we did an elaborate studio setup
Okay.
within our house. We had speakers, we had the D20 which we were producing on. We had the YS200 from where we were getting sounds. We had the U20 keyboard, from which the U20 had some great natural sounds. So all the solo parts were coming from there because it was only a 6-part multi-timbral. And so we produced the whole thing and we were falling short of MIDI parts.
Okay.
So we started doing program changes within the thing itself. So very early on, right, we started getting into like in depth into the technicalities of this. And it took us a long time. It didn't just start and end in one day because we were still trying to figure out, oh, how do you erase, how do you delete, how do you re-record. It was a very primitive sequencer.
And MIDI was new then, so.
MIDI was not very new. MIDI had been there for quite some time, but the new generation, no, this was a new generation of sequencers within keyboards.
Right.
Because earlier there were no sequencers in keyboards. So earlier you had the Juno 1 and the Juno 10 and the Juno 60 and JX5 and Super JX10 and all those keyboards were analog, pure analog. The D10 had started with general MIDI sounds, with sounds like the sitar and santoor, and you know, that was the era of introducing Indian sounds into the Roland family. So anyway, we did the whole song and we realized we had run out of sequencer memory. And then we transferred some of that to the YS200. We ran out of memory over there as well. So I told my dad, Dad, this is not going to happen. It's not. So he said, wait, just hang on for some time. In a couple of days, I'm buying a new keyboard, which is supposed to be the BAP of all keyboards. It's a sampler, it's a sequencer, and it's supposed to be this workstation. So I said, great. So then we'll finish the song at that point. So come next Sunday, we had a new keyboard called the W30. And we transferred all the data from the D20 to the W30. The W30 was the most fabulous sequencer ever. I think Salim used it for about 12 years, 10, 12 years before we all jumped to Logic and all the other stuff. But the W30 was where we finished the song. And towards the end of the song, we said, we have a sampler built in at 15 kilohertz, not even 44. It had two modes, which was 30 kilohertz and 15 kilohertz. At 30 kilohertz, it had only 7.2 seconds of sampling memory. And at 15 kilohertz, it had 15 seconds. But you couldn't do 15 seconds together. You had to break it up into two parts of 7 seconds and 7 seconds. So we did We Are the World. We sampled the whole thing as a sample.
Okay.
And we did There's a Choice We're Making, We're Saving Our Own Lives. That we did as a second part. From a tape we sampled. And we ran it into the sequencer. And that was the beginning for us as a journey into the digital era. We started producing. We had like a huge setup at that point. We had multiple keyboards when we did this whole song. And then Dad got us a 4-track cassette recorder.
Okay.
So we recorded the whole thing on that and mixed it. It was a great way to get a hands-on experience on your own self, right? You're experimenting by your own. There was nobody to tell you that, oh, program changes happen like this and, you know, you can do this or you can do that. Nothing. You had to do everything by yourself.
And that taught you a lot.
That thing taught us a lot, and therefore when we went out into the world producing songs or producing jingles for other people, we were so confident in our craft because we had actually done the research and studied everything. That's how it started. Yeah.
Nice. So at that time, were there others also who were doing what you were doing when you kind of, or were you kind of leaders, or I would say first mover advantage that you have, you know?
I wouldn't say mover advantage. I think
I mean, you all were the first, one of the first.
in the younger lot.
Okay.
In the younger lot. But at that time, I remember the only other people who had W30s. Because W30 became the benchmark keyboard for production for everybody.
Okay.
And then the MC50 and the MC500 and the MC50 Mark II and all those others came later. But W30, I think Kersi Baba had a W30.
Okay.
Charles Vaz had a W30. They were just about starting to get into the market.
Okay.
When I think we got the first or second piece or third piece in Bombay.
Oh, nice.
Because my dad used to import all this stuff. So we had the advantage at that point.
Right. So, like you just said, you know, started getting into the studio business or working for others. In today's times, you have people who WhatsApp you their work and stuff like that. How did you make those studio to studio calls, or did you go to ad agencies, or how did you generate work for yourself?
I don't know. It just kept coming.
But you didn't have to go from door to door, sir.
No.
Gana suniye, ya
Nahin.
weekend program, and
No.
that didn't happen.
No, that didn't happen for us. I think it was more of a word of mouth thing where there was such a big lack of producers at that point that, you know, if you were doing something, you were recognized almost immediately. We were also doing our own stuff, right? We were releasing albums. We worked on Raga Raga was with this voodoo rapper and Chitra from the south. That got us the Sumo Award. So it was our first album and it got Best Pop Song of the Year. So that kind of, you know, brings people to attention that, oh, these guys are new kids on the block. And that had all the latest, you know, like samples, and you're using electronica, which nobody had. Luckily, we had access to Keyboard magazine, and I would see all these sample CDs. So I would order the sample CDs. Each CD at that point was like $100, $200, $300, $500 CDs. Right? So $500 at that point was a lot of money to spend. Even today it is. But at that point it was exceptionally high. When you could get a CD for $10, why would you pay $500 and what does it have? Was the question.
So that Kida was there in you to experiment.
Yeah. So I would buy those CDs online, tell my sister to pay since we didn't have credit cards. We were too young to have credit cards. I'd tell my sister to keep it. So they would be delivered to her in Paris. And then anybody coming from Paris would bring those CDs for us. And that's how we had access to these samples.
Right.
And then we would sample, chop, convert, lots of things to do. And to finally get a sound which was international. To get a sound that nobody else had. Now everybody's got, you know, you have banks. That time there were no banks. You had to create those. You had to take a groove and you had to resample, sample, chop, loop it properly so that it fits into the beat, into the bar. Lots of different things you had to do. It wasn't as simple as pick up something and it's an Apple loop. It always fits. It wasn't like that.
So it's like you had to make your own furniture from a piece of wood.
Yes.
Unlike today an IKEA where you just have to assemble kind of a thing.
Well, it's a little more than that because you had to actually first grow the tree as well.
That's nice.